All right, folks. Well, welcome to this special webinar, our Tech Talks with the GIS Trek. And hey, in today's topic, we're going to be talking about SQL. That is structured query language. And in ArcGIS Pro and even previous versions of ArcGIS, the tool that enables us to do SQL is called the Select by Attributes tool. And so that's the tool we're going to be using today. That's the tool we're going to be leveraging. But we're going to do some stuff a little bit different than out of the box. And I want to show you some techniques to really get some capability out of SQL. Now, let me set this up for you. Inside ArcGIS Pro that you're looking at right now, I have two layers that have been added along with this base map. The first layer that we're going to be using is the live fuel moisture. And just in a nutshell, so you have a little bit of an appreciation of what we're dealing with here, these data represent field measurements taken by mostly federal agencies in preparation for assessing wildfire risk throughout the fire season. And folks will go out in the field, clip different vegetation, dry it, measure it before, while they're in the field. They will weigh that vegetation, take it into the office, put it in a special oven, essentially, and oven dry it out, and then reweigh it. The difference in the weight is the loss of water because of the drying process, and then percent live fuel moisture can be calculated from that relatively simple procedure. So this is what we have: a whole bunch of sample sites across the Great Basin, or specifically the Eastern Great Basin, which is essentially southern Idaho, Utah, and little bits of Wyoming and Arizona right over here. The database that we're interested in today, let's take a look at it. The database has quite a bit of good information. This is a geodatabase that we assembled for one of our studies here. And we see that there's a date field telling us when that measurement was collected in the field, the resulting percent fuel moisture or percent moisture content of that sample, the actual latitude, longitude of the sample point, and so on and so forth. So there's lots of good information inside here. And one of the things I wanted to start with was, let's say we are interested in looking at specific types of fuel. If we look at this here under the fuel field attribute, we see that there are specific plants that are being sampled, and there's specific fuel types that are being sampled. For instance, 10-hour fuels, there's 100-hour fuels, there's 1-hour fuels, there's 1,000-hour fuels. Well, let's say, just for the sake of argument, that I want to find all of the different various hourly fuels. I don't care so much maybe if it's 1 hour, 10 hour, 100, or 1,000 hour. What I want to do is find out how many hourly vegetation type samples have been made. Notice here that there are 42,845 samples in total over all the years. But let's go ahead now and use the Select by Attributes tool and some SQL behind the scenes to answer that question. So it's ramping up here, and by the way, we will have a question and answer period at the end of this webinar. So jot down any questions that you may have and let me hear them, or you can put them in the chat line later on. Everyone is muted right now, and so when we go to question and answer, you can feel free to unmute yourself. Okay, so Select by Attribute tool has been loaded. We are going to be querying the live fuel moisture layer. I'm going to be doing a new selection. So if something was previously selected, that would be wiped out from that record set. And now I'm going to click on New Expression. So we'll start building it here, and then we're going to slide over and actually take a look at the real SQL that's happening behind the scenes. I want to query the fuel attribute, and let's just kind of set this up so it works out nice. Contains the text, and I'm going to type in the word hour. Okay. Now, when I'm doing this in this, I don't really have to worry about putting quotes around it, I noticed, when I'm working in Pro. So let's see how this works out. There we go. I'm looking, this is the actual SQL. So this is a like statement. And the way that those things work is we have a special character here, which is our %sign. And in the world of relational databases, that means wildcard. So as long as the ArcGIS or SQL finds hour somewhere in fuel, it will make that selection. So let's go ahead and run it. And it is done. And what it found is we have, as you see here, now 197 records have been found for various different hour vegetation type samples. Bunch of 1,000-hour, 10-hour, so on and so forth. So that's pretty cool. That's pretty good. The other thing I wanted to show you is how we can work with date. The date data type is very powerful, very useful. And you'll notice here that this date field is actually of a date data type. It's not text, it's not numbers, it is a date data type. So it sometimes can make things a little bit different when we're trying to query or work with it, because it's behind the scenes, it's storing things in a certain format, and we've got to kind of figure things out to make it all work. So what we want to do is, let's say I want to find all of the samples, live fuel moisture samples, that were taken in the year 2014. Could be any year. As you can see here, we have samples all the way out to, in this case, 2018. You might have noticed that earlier. So again, querying the same layer, going to start with a brand new selection. And now actually what I'm going to do is, just for the fun of it, I'm going to show you what this is doing. Notice we have 197 samples that have been taken. So we're going to select a subset from the current selection. What this is going to do is, this is going to tell us or show us how many live fuel moisture samples have been taken of various different hour vegetation or fuel types, but only in the year 2014. So let's jump to another new expression. The date field is what we're querying on now. And we're going to do is on or after. And we can type it and put in anything right here, just for the time being. Okay, so I'm going to put that in. And now I'm going to switch over to SQL. And notice that it does some pretty good setup for us. It's saying just a little date that I happen to click, that goes in here, and it has it formatted all the way out to the hour. Well, here's what we need to do. We're going to leave all that stuff in there just as it is, and now I'm going to change this to 2014, following the format that we saw, 0101. So that is January 1st of 2014. We want all the samples after that date, but at the same time, we want samples that were before, 2015. So if I do the same thing, it's helping me out here. It says, oh, that's a field that I recognize. So I'll double click it and it formats it correctly. Notice it changed the case on this. Now I'm going to do less than or equal to. And I'm going to type in the timestamp again, just like they have it. So that's good. Single quotes, 2014-12 31. And oops, got to close this up with a single quote. Whenever we get into these more complicated queries, I like to click on the little verify as invalid syntax. It didn't like that whatsoever. So let's see, what did I do wrong? I'm going to hit a, oh, yes, yes, yes. And there we go. Beautiful. So what this is saying is I need to make sure that the date is after January 1st of 2014 and at the same time before December 31st, 2014. And the and keyword, or rather operator, is very, very important. Let's run this. We're starting off with 197. And we get this down to 68. And indeed, if we just take a look at what it did things nicely for us, okay? Don't forget to run that little verify expression. Take a look at what you got again to help yourself out. So this works out pretty slick. It only takes a matter of seconds to do all this, as you just saw. But what if we frequently query over specific years? Maybe we don't even care what month or what day it was an individual sample was taken. And of course, this could apply to any date field that you may be using. Let's say what's really important to us is that we have the ability to quickly query and select something happening in an individual year. Well, I wouldn't want to keep doing this over and over and over again. Rather, what I'd like to do is make sure that we have a field that is just the year. So here's what I'm going to do to set this up. Clear this, step one. Now we go back to working with all 42,845 records. I'm going to right-click on the layer from Pro, go into design mode, and I'm going to design a new field. And that new field is going to be called year. Spelled correctly is always best. Whenever I'm adding a new field, what I've noticed is I use my tab key to move from selection to selection. That actually works out better. And we have to choose what data type. Now, we don't want it to be date anymore, and we certainly don't want it to be text. The short integer will work out just fine for us, in fact, and that will allow us to work with years between the year negative 32,000 and positive 32,000. So easily within range of what we're working with, right? Now, whenever we make these structural changes, we'll see that we have to save those changes. Up on the ribbon here, save has been enabled. I'm clicking it. It's making those changes to the structure of this database table. If I close this up, we now see that a year field has been created for us. Okay, so I want to populate this, but I do not want to type this over and over and over again, 42,845. I mean, I could do right over here. Come over here, type in 2018. Wow, I can't do that in 15 minutes or 10 minutes or anything like that. So I'm going to use a little Python, almost a little bit of SQL here to make this happen. So here we go. Right-click on this, calculate the field. And what do I want to do? Well, I want to steal, or I want to borrow the information from the date field. So I'm going to borrow from date field. And specifically, I'm going to get, watch this, dot year. Okay. Let's check if it's happy. It is. Run. Give it just a bit. 42,000 some records it's working on here, 80% plus. Beautiful. Now, there I have just the year extracted from this date field. Now, what I want to do is, let's say I want to, of course, query and find all measurements, SQL, all the fuel moisture measurements between 2014 and 2018. So I'm going to go back to my Select by Attribute tool. It's going to be a brand new expression. And I'm going to use the year field. And specifically, I'm going to go to SQL right away and just write it. Year between, see that? I typed a couple letters here, then I'm double clicking, and I get that year between 2014 and, whoops, and 2018. Let's see if it's happy, and it is. There we go. It found 13,000, a goodly number, right? Did it make any mistakes? No, not at all. Did a nice job. That's the between operator, pretty darn powerful tool. And I mean, there's another way to do it where we'd go year is equal to 2014 and or year is equal to 2015. But this is much shorter, much quicker, and I think easier for us to do this. Now, the other layer that I want to work with, and I'm going to work with here, is the Idaho counties layer. So let me zoom up on it. Okay, those are our counties. And now maybe what I'm interested in doing is I want to ultimately select all the live fuel moisture samples that were taken in Bannock and Bingham counties. Couple ways that we can do that. Yes. We could just do the select by features tool, select these two counties, and then do select by location. That's a good approach. But in some cases, you know, you may have a county here and a county there and a county here and a county there. And so if they're very disparate, you may not really have very good luck on using this. And if you don't know where the county is geographically, shame on you, but if you don't, then you might make mistakes with using this tool. There's no mistakes that you'll make if we're using the SQL tools and actually finding and querying, selecting the county by its name. So to do this, I think we already know how we can do it. I'm going to show you a little different tool in ArcGIS Pro. I'm now querying Idaho counties, again, a new expression, and I want to query the county, right? It's the county name, and I'll now jump again to SQL. I'm going to change this to the word in. That's another very powerful SQL keyword. And notice these are, again, text, so I need a single quote around them. And I'm going to type in, since I have more than one, I'm going to open parentheses. And one thing you should also be aware of is that SQL is kind of picky, kind of particular. And so we need to make sure that, number one, we're not only spelling it right, but we match the case that's required also. There's some trickery we could do, which is actually kind of complicated to make it so that it's not case sensitive. But if I just pay a little bit of attention to this, it works out just fine. Let's take a look at this. Expression, again, is valid. Run this, and there's my two selections. And of course, you know now that we could then do select by location using the selected features in Idaho counties to select the live fuel moisture samples within those counties. I'm not going to go into that because I'm focusing on SQL today, and I want to show you one more very interesting thing about SQL that may be a big time saver for you in the future. If we look at these live fuel moistures samples, and right now it is sorted by object ID. the first object ID is actually northerly. And as we move this thing down, 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 the samples are almost geographically entered into this thing. So that's kind of interesting. So let's say I want to do a subset. I want to find 1/2 of these, exactly half of these samples I want selected. And I want them evenly distributed across the Eastern Great Basin. Now, that would be a heck of a chore using the Select Features tool, but there is a slick little trick that I'm going to show you that will actually do that, because we know that that's how these things are working. And you could use this little trick to help you out in lots of different instances. Again, back to the Select by Attributes tool. New expression. We're going to work with object ID. I'm now going to go over again SQL. And here we go. Watch this. Home. We're going to use what's called a modulator. Okay. Don't worry about that. It tells us what it's going to do here, right? So it recognizes it already. Modulator 2. So what it's doing is it's taking object ID, dividing it by 2. And if I say it's equal to 0, what that means is I will be selecting all the even numbers. And if I put an answer over here of 1, modulator object ID, and it could be any numeric field, by the way, comma 2, half of them, and what we're dividing by, I should say. If it equals 1, then I'm going to be selecting the odd numbers. Okay, follow that? I hope so. Expression is valid. Let's go ahead and run this. There we go. I have selected 2 and 4 and 6 and so on and so on and so on. Works out really slick and awfully fast. If you're interested, certainly practice with, try out the actual SQL. You can do a lot more here than what you can just kind of out of the box, if I call it that, to help yourselves out. Oh, I do want to note that we're doing some workshops here over spring break. So if you're interested, go to our workshops webpage, learn about those full-day workshops that we're offering. But now back to this. Use w3schools.com. This is really a good site to go to learn SQL and some of these more complex features and capabilities of SQL. And most of these, I think every one of these will be available to you and applicable to you in ArcGIS Pro. So I have used a little bit more of my time than I thought I was going to, but I wanted to share all this good stuff with you. And let me go ahead and open it up for any questions that you may have. Feel free to unmute yourself or just put things into the chat.